today's lecture focuses on migration skill corridors as an emerging policy framework that aims to address labor shortages in Europe while promoting more structured and ethical forms of international skills mobility. The idea behind these corridors is to better align labor markets needs in destination countries with the available skills in countries of origin through more institutionalized and coordinated pathways. At the same time, this approach raises very important questions about its limitations, including risks such as brain drain, unequal power relations, and challenges in implementations and skills recognition. So there are exactly this issue we will explore today. This lecture is organized within the framework of the Horizon Europe project Link for Skills. The project focuses on developing sustainable and cooperative approaches to global skills mobility, with particular attention to partnerships between countries of origin and destination. And it brings together researchers and policy experts to better understand how migration can contribute to development, labor market needs, and fair mobility systems. You can also find more information about the project at our website. I will send the link in the chat. So it's now my great pleasure to introduce our speaker, Professor Godfried Engbersen. Godfried is Emeritus Professor of General Sociology at Erasmus University, Rotterdam. He has previously held academic positions at the universities of Leiden, Amsterdam, and Utrecht. His research has extensively addressed international migration and social inequality. From 2014 to 2024, he was a member of the Scientific Council for Government Policy, contributing to the key reports on migration, diversity, and integration. He is currently involved in the Horizon Europe, our project Link for Skills. His research focuses also on the recent research on housing situation of labor migrants, irregular migration in the Netherlands, and the relationship between migration and social class. And we are also very pleased to have with us today our discussant. Wait a minute, sorry. So Ksenia Ivanovic is a PhD candidate at the Institute for Management Research at Radboud University. Her research examines the relationship between knowledge and policy in the Western Balkans, with a particular focus on ontology-led analysis. She is also a junior researcher at project manager in our sister Horizon Europe project, Global Strategy for Skills, Migration, and Development. She has a background in political economy, public policy, and economics, and has previously worked at Pompeu Fabra University and the Center for Advanced Economic Studies in Belgrade. So let me briefly outline the structure of today's lecture. So first, Professor Engbersen will deliver his lecture. This will be followed by Ksenia Ivanovic comments and questions. And after that, we will open the floor for questions and comments from all participants. So, and with that, I would like to give the floor to the Professor Engbersen. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ivanka, for your very nice introduction. And it's really a a pleasure to reflect on what I would say the merits, but also on the limitations of the concept of migration skill corridors that informs, as you know, the Link for Skills project. And in my talk, and I try to be brief in this talk, I start with three very simple basic questions that were crucial, I would say, at the start. Now, especially the first two questions at the start of the Link for Skills project, and then take a bit more time to discuss the relevance and also the limitations of this concept of migration skill corridors. So I will try to say a few words what that's at stake, what's the problem, what to do, and then the pièce de résistance, I would say, is what is the relevance of migration skill corridor as a policy instrument? All right. Okay, what's at stake? And I think this was a key question that was I would say, a key starting point of the Link for Skills project, is that we are seeing big structural, demographic, and economic changes. Just to mention the basic ones: an aging European population, increase in the proportion of older adults, shrinking working age population. Of course, there are differences between European societies, but nevertheless, this is the general trend. On the other hand, we see the sectoral economic shifts in the European economy because of technological advances and an increasing demand for skilled workers, medium skilled and highly skilled. And I would say that's the European phase. On the other hand, we've seen a lot of non-European countries. I just give a brief example: India, Pakistan, Indonesia, the Philippines, Sub-Saharan Africa have a growing young population. Here we speak about demographic dividend. However, it's accompanied with youth unemployment and the underutilized human capital. And the question is, of course, is it possible to take advantage of, now, to see if we can help each other? Yeah. However, wait. Because what is the problem? And this is a big problem, and of the keywords are skill shortages and skill mismatches. We see a shortage of high-skilled workers for emerging skill-intensive jobs in specific sectors of the economy, driven by AI. We see that routine medium-skilled jobs are at risk. However, and I think that's extremely important also for the Link for Skills project, nevertheless, we see substantial and persistent shortages in key medium jobs, in key roles like nurses, electricians, renewable energy technicians, construction supervisors. I gave just a few examples, which we see on the one hand the disappearance of medium-skilled jobs, but at the same we see a growing demand for specific jobs. Now, and we also see this skill mismatch, that we have a growing educated workforce on the one hand, but it doesn't align with labor market demands. So this is the problem. This is the problem. What, of course, and the question is, what to do? Now, and I would everyone advise to read this extremely wonderful article by colleagues of us in Vienna and Warsaw, by Guillaume Marois, but also by Michaela, Agnieszka, and José, published in the Journal of European Journal of Population. It says Marois 2026, but 2025, it should be 2026. At the end of my slides, you will see the title of the publication, in which they discuss potential and relevant policy options to deal with these skill shortages and skill mismatches. One is the human capital approach response. So better education which is really better related to labor market needs. Mid-career retraining, which is strongly related to the strategy of lifelong learning. Late retirement, more working hours. But this is not being discussed in their paper. I added it, but it is, for example, extremely relevant in a country like the Netherlands, in which specifically women working in specific sectors like healthcare and education work part-time. So is it possible to go from part-time to more working hours? We have the employer's response, automation, now, extremely important development, specifically because of AI, upskilling the workforce, and finally we have the immigration response. Higher immigration, and we know that's not the solution, but more relevant is better selection, more selective migration. Now, and one takeaway I would say from the up until now from the Link for Skills project is that we need a specific policy mix to deal with these skills shortages and mismatches. And I would say this policy mix is strongly context dependent. It differs from country to country, maybe from region to region. And it's very complex. Since some of these policy options are politically extremely sensitive. Take, for example, late retirement, being under debate in France, in Poland, in the Netherlands, extremely difficult, you know, to implement programs for a later retirement, but also migration is politically extremely sensitive. And there are, I would say, policy options that are still difficult to implement. We will talk for years and years and years about lifelong learning, but we see that there are not that effective programs yet. Okay, but I would say the notion of migration skills corridors is related to better selection. Okay, what to say about this concept? Of course, the concept itself, migration corridors, stems from the work of Jürgen Carling, in which he used it simply as a kind of analytical empirical concept, just to see what is happening between country A and country B, as a kind of frame of observation. What kind of migration flows do we witness? So it has a strong binational focus. What's going on between country A and B in terms of emigration, immigration, return migration, circular migration, etc. So it has not predetermined direction. And of course, if you look at country A and B, there can be differences in activity, low activity, high activity, in size, big numbers, small numbers, composition in terms of gender, but also in terms of class and in terms of skills, and also to take into account a dynamic perspective, because a corridor between country A and B can differ in time, can emerge, it can phase out, it can again increase. So it's very important to understand this dynamic perspective. And now, okay, now this the heart of the matter, I would say that in Link for Skills, we use it not only as an analytical empirical concept to understand what's going on between countries, and in our case, we are looking from West European countries to non-European countries, but also as a kind of policy instrument. Because we see nowadays a multitude, I would say, of private initiatives, not only and public initiatives, by individual companies, by individual recruitment agencies, by cities, by states, state-led initiatives, market-driven initiatives. And the question is it possible to think about more structured pathways for fair-skilled migration, to think about more realistic and effective programs, to embed them in legal frameworks, for example, ILO conventions to protect migrant workers, also to think about standard and conditions for fairness, for example, not to recruit healthcare workers from countries on the health workforce safeguard list of the World Health Organization because their healthcare systems are extremely vulnerable, and also to think about complementary policies. And you can think about policies of retention, how to maintain skilled migrants, but also think about progress in terms of return and circular. Of course, return migration, circular is extremely difficult, but I think the notion of migration skill corridors can be a kind of opportunity to think about also this kind of complementary policies. So I would say the idea behind a more coordinated approach is just to use or to optimize bridges, pathways that's already there, and to also to be very carefully about developing new ones. But if you do that, you have to take into account, of course, there are different migration skill corridors and they have different dimensions. So we in the project we have these 5 ideal types, and it's important to note that they can coexist next to each other, and they can change. I already said it, they can change over time. So you have the typical post-colonial corridors and the bridges, the pathways between Western societies and former colonies. Okay, so you have, for example, take for example UK and India. The post-guest workers corridor, established in the 60s and 70s, the workers doing low-skilled work in Europe coming from the Mediterranean Rim countries, Southern Europe, Turkey, Morocco, followed by family formation, reunification, and family formation. We have the high-skilled corridors facilitated nowadays by all these highly skilled migration schemes, the Europe Blue Card, the medium-skilled and sector-based corridors facilitated by triple win programs, by talented partnership developed by the EU. And of course, we also have the humanitarian corridor, which is the consequence of war and violence. And that brings in people with diverse skill sets. And of course, the last corridor, the humanitarian corridor, is not about recruiting people, using people that already are in specific destination countries because of war and violence. Okay, this is a kind of rather atypical typology. We have to take into account this. I think it's strongly relevant for the argument that follows, that if you look at the specific corridors, they have different dimensions. Some of them are rather established, post-colonial guest worker corridors, and some of them are rather new. They are emerging, like the medium-skilled and sector-based corridors or the highly skilled corridors. Some of them are already well structured. Some of them are the consequence of rather improvised ad hoc actions by specific actors, specifically private actors. And some of them are indeed consequence of state-led policies. Others are more the consequence of market-driven and sector-driven activities. So it is. I think it's crucial also to understand these underlying dimensions. Now, this is the link for skills corridor approach, and I adapted this beautiful slide from our colleagues Helen Schwenke and Johanna Ullmann, because this is the link for skills corridor approach. 14 corridor cases and migration corridors between EU countries like Austria, Germany, Poland, the Netherlands, and Canada, and on the other hand, Ghana, India, Indonesia, Morocco, Nigeria, Philippines, and Ukraine. It's 14 corridor cases, but it doesn't mean you have 14 skilled corridors. But it could be that between countries you will have a number of different skill corridors. Now, let me say a few words just to see how we can make use of the concept. And I base myself on the papers we have written, and the work was primarily done by Julia Reinhold and our colleagues from the other country teams about a few corridors. So let me say a few words about these kind of corridors. I start with the Morocco-Netherlands corridor. And I would say this is a typical example of a post-guest workers corridor that is underutilized. We know that from the 60s and 70s, people from Morocco came to the Netherlands to work in the Dutch industries. And then this labor migration ended, followed by family migration, family unification, family formation, and now it's phasing out. Nevertheless, if you look at the Netherlands, the Moroccans are the second largest migrants group in the Netherlands. So there are substantial numbers of Moroccans living in the Netherlands. I live, for example, in the city of Utrecht, so there are neighborhoods in which a lot of Moroccans live. So there are The substantial numbers are there. But we see nowadays limited skilled mobility. There are mobility partnership and bilateral agreements between Morocco and the Netherlands, but it's strongly, I would say, framed around return, about the issue of rejected asylum seekers to bring them back. There's really very limited skilled mobility, but I would say it has a strong potential. We should reawaken, I would say, this corridor. We should reframe the political narrative that is rather negative about Morocco. I'm happy to see that limited initiatives have been started. So I think Morocco can play a key role for bringing in medium-skilled workers, for example, in healthcare and technical jobs. So this is an example, and we do have a kind of migrant infrastructure that would facilitate their incorporation in Dutch society. The India-Netherlands corridor is another extremely interesting example. The Netherlands is one of the most important destination countries for India. It's also one of the Indian population is rapidly growing in the Netherlands, specifically in specific areas around Amsterdam, but also in other regions in the Netherlands. We have no bilateral mobility agreements. Of course, there are specific agreements with respect to social security, about taxation, but there are strong barriers for the medium skilled. We have seen limited initiatives, small-scale initiatives, to, for example, to bring healthcare workers to the Netherlands, but these programs have, to a certain degree, failed. And we see, and we've discussed this with a lot of stakeholders, they are in need of a stronger public-private coordination, to have a more structured policies with India. So again, this is it is private driven, but to make it more sustainable, there should be a better, I would say, a combination between state policies and private initiatives. Now, I already said a few things about Ukraine and the Netherlands, or not, and because of the war in because of the Russian invasion in 2022, you have a big, I would say, corridor between Ukraine and European countries, among which the Netherlands. And of course, it is a consequence of rather ad hoc because of the war. In the past, we saw more private initiative bringing limited people to the Netherlands. But again, this is a beautiful example of an underutilized skill potential. We have, for example, now between 160,000, 170,000 registered refugees. Luckily, they have the immediate access to the labor market, but this work-first approach of the Netherlands brings them jobs, but they do not use their skills in an optimal way. And this is the classical example of recognition of skills, of process of reskilling. Now, let me finally, because also an example of the post-colonial corridor, for example, the corridor between Indonesia and the Netherlands, extremely empty. Again, we have a lot of people from Indonesia, first, second, and third generation in the Netherlands. And I think there's a huge potential for medium-skilled migration. Now, I will not go into detail, but just a few examples to see that how you can look at and use the specific corridors that are already there. So, what I would like to say is that this corridor approach, I think, gives room for a more coordinated and rational workforce planning, less ad hoc, and also a better combination of public and private initiatives. So in some cases, the state has to step in, and some cases we need more private initiatives. And I hope that, you know, my discussants will discuss this further with you. Of course, the challenge will be to embed this kind of, I would say, skilled migration, skilled mobility in rights-based legal frameworks. Yeah. And also to think, if you have this more coordinated programs, it also would be better, I think, to think about better and more efficient procedures in terms of recognition of skills and reskilling and upskilling programs. And finally, I have the idea that that it also will strengthen the political and societal legitimacy of migration, and to bring in workers that contribute to economies of destination origin countries. It's still migration in Europe is a very political sensitive topic. For example, in my country, the Netherlands, it prevents, I would say, a rational policy. For example, the clearest example is that we are in need of specific medium-skilled migrant labor, but there is not a political space for it. But I would say a more coordinated program, and also in terms of integration and retention, would strengthen the political and societal legitimacy of smart labor migration policies. However, this approach has also some limitations, I would say. Yeah, it is to a certain degree this migration skill approach is a kind of utopian approach. Now, it's clearly what is a disadvantage is has this binational focus. Of course, you have a kind of umbrella program that supports specific skills mobility. But I'm now discussing what kind of bilateral agreements, mobility partnership can exist between countries. But I also think we are in need of a more coordinated approach between countries. Now you see all individual European countries are trying to develop their individual policies, and I think a more coordinated policy is needed on a higher level than only the national level or the regional level or the city level. What is also I think, a very important point is a corridor approach with a lot of ethical dimensions. It could be against the interest of an individual migrant. What if your country is not listed on the health workforce safeguard list? Are you not allowed to go from your country, for example, to a European country? Or if you are not simply part of a specific corridor? So I also think that there should always be space, in my view, for individual migrants and individual employers' needs. So that's, of course, also a challenge, this combination about more structured policies and, on the other hand, the interest of individual labor migrants. And finally, of course, the notion of migration skill corridors has this idea of triple win. Is it possible to have, programs that are in favor of the individual migrant, of the destination country, and also the origin country? What we witness, and I think it's also the outcome of the analysis of Link for Skills, that it's difficult. We see small-scale programs that are difficult to scale up. They are a little bit unequal power balance. They are not always in the advantage of the origin countries. So this notion of reciprocity, of mutual gains, is not always reached. So I think these are three, and there are more limitations. I would just want to mention three. But like me, I would like to finish here. So I would say, to summarize, I do think now, given, I would say, the fragmentation of all kinds of individual initiatives all over the world to attract, and the competition for skilled migrants, I think it's a bad, no, it's not the way we should go. And I do think that the concept of migration skill as a policy instrument is important to rethink and to think about more rational, more coordinated policies for skilled migration that are in favor of the destination, the origin country, and the individual labor migrant. So I would encourage everyone, if you're interested in the concept and in the application of the concept, to look at the website of Link for Skills. You will find too many working papers, to tell the truth, already, but there is a very richness of all kinds of material. I listed here the original concept, which is not on the website, of Jürgen Carling, in which he introduced the notion of migration corridors, but you also see the work of Julia, myself, about migration skill courses and some applications, and also the work of our colleagues from Vienna and Warsaw. So thank you very much for your attention. And I got the my slides could be distributed, Ivanka.
Okay, yeah, I will send to all participants after.
I have
the
a better
lecture.
version, so I will send the last one to you.
Okay.
I discover I'm presented a little bit the wrong one. Yeah.
Okay. So thank you very much, Professor Engbersen, for this insightful lecture. And I would now like to invite our discutant, Ksenia Ivanovich, to share her comments, her questions. So Ksenia, the floor is yours. And maybe Godfried, you can stop the sharing, but I don't know, maybe. Okay, yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you, Ivana, for inviting me to join as a discussant. And of course, thank you, Godfried, for the presentation and also the wonderful book chapter that I've had the pleasure of reading from the upcoming manifesto edited by Link4Skills. I've read it in preparation for today, and it was also really helpful in understanding more about the research. So yeah, I was preparing comments, and then I was thinking, indeed, I think there is a strong case for policy relevance of migration skills corridors, and I think that is quite well argued even in a short presentation like this. So thank you so much, Godfried, for this. And I've had many reflections. I think I will try to structure maybe my points or questions around in a way around your slide where you talk about migration skill corridors as an analytical and empirical concept, and then of course as a policy instrument. So on the first one, migration skill corridors as an analytical concept, I was curious whether you could elaborate more on how the typology was developed. Simply, it is a cornerstone of the project, of course, but and I know from the chapter that you wrote that it builds, of course, on the literature that was out there as well. But how did you develop the typology? What were maybe the challenges or choices that you had to make as a scholar and team of researchers at Link4Skills? I think it would be useful to know from the perspective also of using this in our future work. And in that sense, what would be your main critique, not to the migration skill corridors, but really to the typology that you present? So that would be one question. And yeah, I think it would be really good if we could use this more in our work on the topic. And then, of course, when it comes to migration skill corridors as a policy instrument, I think on the GS4S project, so the project that I'm working on, we are very much focused on the talent partnerships, global skills partnerships. They have many names. And I think that would fit a lot in the sector-specific corridor that you mentioned here. So from that perspective, I was thinking, yeah, indeed, how do we deal with all of these challenges? And I would first echo everything that you've said about challenges around scale, around uptake, around brain drain implications, where we define brain drain as sort of emigration that is disproportionate relative to the educational structure of the population. So not just the so-called educated people leaving, but really relative to the population education structure. So all these challenges are something that we've seen in the GS4S project as well. And in your book chapter, I've also read about the Triple Win project, where you mentioned, I believe, the Germany-Indonesia corridor. And that same project that focuses on the care sector, so on nurses, which is a very shortage occupation across Europe. That same project was cancelled in Serbia, which is part of my home region, because indeed 800 people left in 7 years, which is a lot for the Serbian case. So it's interesting to see that now it's being implemented, of course, with much larger countries. So again, echoing everything that you've said, my question is then, can these power asymmetries that are inherent to the design of talent partnerships or similar triple win programs be really addressed, and more so if we situate these in a broader context of policy and political objectives? Because we also know that these programs are often a sort of part of broader negotiations, and we've seen that they are, for example, often developed with countries that agree to assist European economies with migration management. So what would be your reflection on that, or do you have examples that you would like to talk more about that we could learn from? From the GS4S project, again, I would say that we've seen very positive experiences with more bottom-up initiatives, but as you said in the presentation, the issue is indeed that there is a lot of these ad hoc programs and not really a very well structured approach. And if I may, final question from me on the policy instrument angle. You also mentioned that the post-colonial and guest worker types of migration skill corridors should be given a new life, let's say, and you mentioned some positive initiatives in that regard. So could you elaborate a bit more on that? What is the takeaway we should leave this conversation with when it comes to these types of corridors? And thank you so much. I hope I didn't speak too long. And I look forward to the rest of the conversation.
Thank you, Ksenia, for this excellent reflections and questions. So, Professor Engbersen, would you like to respond?
You just formulated the 3 most difficult questions, to tell you the truth. So thank you so much for, and I don't have good answers. For the first, about the typology, of course, it's not that original, because it's, to a certain degree, it's fully based on the migration literature that says a lot about, of course, migration because of war, because of labor migration. But if I would criticize myself, that I'm always in favor of a kind of reduction of complexity. So a typology should not be too long. But I learned from colleagues that they said already to me, I can add easily 3 extra corridors. And they did research in origin countries. So if I criticize myself, I would say maybe it is too Western based and based on a kind of destination perspective. However, the challenge would be, but I'm still curious what kind of meta corridors they will mention. But I do think these are nowadays the most important ones. Yeah, and of course there are the concept, but you have to take into account it's not about migration; it's about labor migration. Yeah, and of course the humanitarian corridor is a little bit an outsider in the typology, because it's not about recruiting workers; it's about utilizing workers that are already in specific destination countries. But to my understanding, they capture the main dimensions of skilled migration. But I think if you look at from a more origin perspective, I think you could also mention them. I know a few, but my colleagues should do that. About your point about triple win, I think that's the most important point. Because you could say, if you are very critical, you'd say it are a little bit symbolic programs, it's triple win. And they are not able to deal with the power relationship. So at the end of the day, specific destination countries will profit. It can lead and will lead to specific brain drain. All kinds of ideas about circular migration, return migration. It will not be the case. So it's difficult, but I do, and that's why I hope that the Nijmegen University will give some answers. I do think that if you embed it in specific legal frameworks, stronger legal frameworks that are binding, that maybe you can bring in guarantees to ensure a certain triple win. And I also think there are but what you said about the talent partnership, the mobility partnership, there are no, at the moment, we do not have very good evaluations of this specific program. So I hope that they will lead to best practices, that we really have some good practices that shows it is possible. And I think the power balance is a little bit shifting given the skill shortages in Western societies. Yeah. So you could profit from this, I would say, these skill shortages that are there, and countries would have a demographic dividend. Yeah, I think this is my general answer. And also when it comes to the final question about, is it possible to reimagine and to rethink this guest workers corridor and the former colonies corridor? I do think it's possible. I do think it's possible. And for example, take Pakistan, India. I do think that the power balance is to a certain degree shifting, and that there can be more equal relationships. Yeah, but again, it should be more coordinated, embedded in strong legal frameworks. Thank you for your questions.
Ksenia, do you want to reply, or we open the floor for general discussion?
Sure, just very briefly, thank you, Godfried, so much. And yeah, I think those are great points also when it comes to legal frameworks. It is something that in our project we are really looking into. But of course, even there, when it comes to embedding this into broader frameworks that are already out there, it's a bit difficult in the sense that there are questions of, okay, who is really accountable for implementing this?
Yeah. No, sorry to interrupt you. Many of this, I would say, there are not strong legal frameworks. It's more soft law very often. So, yeah, so it's yeah, that's one of the big issues. Yeah.
Exactly. So that is an important point for us to tackle as well. I think, well, you from Link for Skills know that we are writing about it in our chapter for your manifesto. But yes. I think one other reflection when it comes to the legal frameworks is, especially with talent partnerships, it's interesting that they don't offer a new way for legal migration. So these programs, they offer maybe training and these types of arrangements, but they don't help people migrate in a more easy, in a more protected, clear way. So that is also something that we were discussing in our publications, because what is the added value of a program from this perspective if it doesn't make migration easier in most of the cases? Yeah, so just a final reflection for us, this is also why we are exploring maybe alternatives to sort of public-private setup of these partnerships, and colleagues from the project had a working paper on business-to-business partnerships, or what could we learn from these kinds of setups. But I will end there, and thank you so much again.
Yeah, thank you, Ksenia. Professor Embersen, would you like to respond to this reflection, Ksenia reflection?
No, but I just wanted to say that I think that in Link for Skills, there are some projects that are really facilitate. Of course, there are training initiatives in origin country that really also facilitate the mobility and migration to specific European countries. So I hope that at the end of the day, we have a list of good and bad practices from which we can learn, including all these bottom-up initiatives. But bottom-up initiatives can only survive to a certain extent is supported also by state-led policies and by also the participation of strong private partners.
Okay. Thank you. So we now open the floor for questions. So please raise your hands or write your question in chat. Dominika, please go ahead with your question.
Hello, thank you for
Hello.
a very interesting presentation. I'm very inspired by your way of thinking, which is, I think, contrary to the dominant political narratives about migration. So it's great that you're trying to introduce this different way of thinking and different narrative. But to me, the main trouble is that this is indeed idealistic, as you said, and I think all these bilateral programs and these more structured and organized programs, they don't exist in many places because actors in the destination countries don't want them. That is, the state doesn't want them because it doesn't want, I don't know, more people being in the health insurance system. Because it's costlier, more people bringing children for education, and employers don't want it because they have larger bargaining strength over these people who come in an unstructured manner. So to me, the trouble is how to convince the receiving societies and sort of who could be the group, interest group or other group lobbying in favor of this, so that it would actually happen, because as I see it, it's a conflict of interest here. So that's the trouble. Thank you.
Godfried,
yes.
you
Dominika,
go
thank
ahead.
you for your, it's good to see you, and thank you for your question. But I think the first answer would be, the first, I would say, stakeholder that will be in favor of such programs is the business sector, is the private sector. And secondly, I would say part of the public sector, for example, healthcare. Because, and of course, that's what's called the liberal paradox. So you see that including Poland, of course, you do not have official labor market policies of labor migration policy, but laborers are coming to Poland, still to do specific job, low skill job, medium skill job, and in Warsaw you still have a lot of, I would say, expats and high skilled workers working for international companies. So I would say the first group that is able to lobby is the private sector, and I assume that will also happen, for example, in Poland. And to a certain degree, what you were mentioning about Poland is also happening in the Netherlands, that there is a kind of reluctance because of the political sensitivities towards migration to be rather reluctant when it comes to medium-skilled migration. But if there are no technicians, if there are no nurses at the end of the day, so you will also see, I think, a response from society and a more orderly, organized way of labor migration, I think, is easier to accept, because when we talk about skilled migration, it's really a group that contributes to the economy and society. But my answer would be, I think that in Poland, the private sector would put certain demands on the government to say, hey, we are in need for specific workers. That's not utopian. That's according to the interest of economic sectors. You don't look very convincing, but that would be my answer.
No, it is convincing for some sectors, and for some others maybe a bit less. I mean, they would still appreciate irregularly coming workers, but hopefully that will slowly change in the right direction.
Yeah, but the skilled migration is because the irregular migration, it's difficult to be an undocumented or an irregular worker in a hospital, or to work as a technician, or to work as a highly skilled migrant. So, and I think that for this kind of, because this is about Link for Skills is about skilled migration. I think for those with categories, it's difficult to be irregular.
Okay, Emma, please go ahead with your comments or questions.
Hi, thank you, Godfried, for great presentation. I mean, we're all starting to get familiar with the concept at Link for Skills, of course, because we've all been using it so much in the last year. I have a question. How do we reconcile the concept of skill corridors with sometimes the kind of universal approach to migration policy that a lot of countries have, including Canada, where countries of origins and nationalities aren't necessarily taken into account. And then we have these migration corridors that start to arise where migrant agency takes a lot of place, and contextual aspects in the country of origin create this kind of corridor, but it might not necessarily reflect in higher level policy. How do we think about that, both on a conceptual level and also on a policy level?
Godfried, you're muted. You are muted.
No, of course you can have a universal approach that is independent of specific corridors, and you could say Canada is kind of an example of that. You do not have a specific policy that targeted, although that maybe it's changing nowadays. But again, I would say some corridor. I would answer that for Canada, it would be relevant to think about a more structured approach on the one hand. On the other hand, we see that corridors are being created not by state-led policies, not by private initiatives of employers, but are the consequence of the agency of individual migrants that lead into migrant networks. Yeah, and now that's a very relevant question, I think, and to think about, and it shows the resilience of migrants. I think the undocumented migration is an example of that. But now I have to think about that. I think it can be relevant also to acknowledge this kind of corridors that are created not by private sector or state policies, by individual agencies, but very often they are very vulnerable and very fragile. And the question is, should you target policies to them?
Thank you. Yeah, that's great.
Okay, Bernhard, please go ahead with your questions or comments.
Yes, hello, Bernhard Bechinig, ICMPD. I'm a migration researcher now for more than 30 years, but before doing this, I have worked in labor market sociology. And I would like to comment on something which has already been mentioned before. When we're talking about skilled work, skilled labor, we are talking about two different spheres, let's put it that way. One sphere is the unregulated sector, meaning there's a sector, this is usually the handicrafts, etc., where the employer decides if the person is skilled and employs the person, and consumer protection and quality of work is more or less controlled via insurances, via consumer protection law, etc. And there's a second sector, which is the regulated sector. And the regulated sector, which is very strong in the area of medicine, but care, but also in the area of training, education, we have very strong regulated professions. And this is a point I would like to go a little bit more into detail. I'm currently involved into a project of labor mobility in the field of care work, nursing care work, and early childhood care and early childhood kindergarten care. And what we have seen there, and I think this is a link to something which are sometimes missing in migration studies, a labor market, better understanding of how labor market works. A labor market does not only fit skills, there's an understanding of professions in the labor market. And this understanding of professions entails a long history of culturally embedded norms and values which are linked to these professions. So it's not a question of skill transfer. To give you an example, we have discussed and interviewed Germany and Austria employers in the kindergartens and who had experiences employing, say, kindergarten teachers from the Ukraine, from this population, but also who've recruited in the Balkans and in other countries. And one of the main examples we had with the problems we were confronted with was that, well, we have a different conception of childhood in the areas they're coming from. So childhood is more seen as becoming, is more authoritarian education. It's less child-oriented, and it doesn't. The skills are there, but the mindset is different. So we don't only talk about skills. We talk about mindsets. We talk about culturally embedded norms in professions. We're talking about professions as a set of skills. There's another different example, nursing. So we have learned that a lot of nurses who have been recruited in Germany and Austria from the Philippines are very upset because they have their job, their training is much more close to the medical profession in the country they've been trained. In Germany and Austria, nurses are also doing, say, kind of very support in hygiene, in personal care, which is not the understanding of nursing in the Philippines. So some of them have been leaving and going to other countries because of that. So what I think we have to keep in mind that we're not talking about skills transfer, but we are talking a lot of skills matching, but in order to prepare this, we have to talk a little bit more about the cultural concept associated with professions. And this is more than simply skills. This is not so much the case in the area of, say, car mechanics. It's much easier. So I think this is an issue which is under-researched in our areas in migration studies.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
thank you,
Bernard,
Godfried. Yeah, your thoughts.
No, Bernard, if I may, now I think it's also a very important point, because what I think I could say the same about the Netherlands. Many programs in the past have failed because they did not take into account this kind of cultural, what you call professional norms that can differ. The only thing I would say, take for example, India and the UK. You see many healthcare workers from India working as nurses or specialists in the UK, and they're doing fine. And I would say that's why I think the notion of migration skill corridors is relevant. I think you have to take that into account in the training, for example, in the training institutes in the origin countries, these cultural norms that can be different. I think it's very important to make a program successful. But also, I would like to say, for example, the example of we have this, like in Germany, you have this huge Moroccan population in the Netherlands with hospitals that are embedded in this kind of regions and neighborhoods. I would say, I think it would be rather easy to recruit healthcare workers from Morocco, because they can relate for them it's easier sometimes to relate to the patients than a Dutch nurse, for example. So sometimes you can make use of this difference in cultural norms, and on the other hand, I think you have to train people and to make them aware of this kind of soft skills that are extremely relevant to make a program successful. But it's a very relevant point, an important point.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? Maybe someone want to share the findings from some specific corridors? Johanna, Olga, Emil, maybe someone want to share some findings or some thoughts?
I'm not sure if you can hear me.
Yeah, we can.
You can, perfect. Okay, I can only maybe add that, yeah, we struggle. I was studying the Philippine-Poland migration corridor, and we struggled before with to fit perfectly into the typology. But what I understand today also is that's a concept we should try to observe, we should try to develop maybe. So yeah, that's that's what I could add. Like, it's not really easy to fit perfectly, and the skill is absolutely social construction, and also what we observe in the Philippine, for example, Philippines are famous for, that was already mentioned by other today, from their nurse training, for their healthcare system, hospitality, while they are the sectors absolutely absent when they are coming to Poland. And they are working at the manufacturing sector, etc., etc. So that was very interesting, for example, that this corridors
Olga,
could be different.
But,
Yeah.
because I learned from your paper that it's not most of them are men, isn't it?
Yeah, they're most, and this is another.
And they do medium skilled or low skilled work.
They're middle skilled, but they're usually highly educated. This is
Exactly.
also
So I
medium
would say
age. Yes.
it's a
and middle age. Yeah.
Yeah. So I would say it's a typical example, working more, to use Bernard's words, on in more unregulated sector, where their skills are being recognized. Yeah. But it's a sector-based, medium-skilled form of labor migration, I would argue.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I can agree. Yeah, that's true. That's true. Like it's just different from the typical patterns of Filipino migration around the world, but
That
maybe
makes it
it's typical
interesting.
for the corridors between Poland and different countries. That's true.
Yeah, thank you, Olga. Maybe someone else, Johanna, Irina, maybe do you want to share some findings from some specific corridors? Okay. Any other questions, comments? Yeah, okay. So I think that we can stop here and to discuss by, for example, by emails, if someone has some questions or comments. So thank you for this discussion, and many thanks again to the Professor Godfried Engbersen and Ksenia Ivanovich. And thank you all for joining us today, and have a great afternoon. We will share the presentation after the lecture.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For all the
See
hard
you.
work.
We will
you very
send
much.
the information
Thank
about
you.
the next
Thank
lectures.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay. Thank you all. Godfried, thank you very much. Yes.
Ivanka, I sent you the last version. Maybe you can share that one.
Okay. Yeah. But you sent it today, yes?
Yeah, I think
Or now?
Yes, I think I sent it today because I changed this one a little bit. So I'm not.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, no problem. I will send the last
But thank you so much
version.
for organizing it and be a little bit understanding for this digital non-wise professor. Yeah.
I think it's it's sometimes complicated for everyone. So everything's okay.
But because there's one thing that happens sometimes internationally is that if I want to upload it, because it's always easy.
Yeah,
like
but
some programs...
before the presentation, it's something happens. Yeah.
No, that you can have because I put it on my computer, not on my Hub on the Pub, and it didn't show a link to my computer, so I'm sorry for that. But everything was great. So thank you once again. Yes. Yeah. I think that we had nearly 30 participants at the beginning, and then during the discussion 27. So I think it's
was
done.
great. So thank
Okay.
you very much. Yeah, we will share the link with the Terry, and Terry will prepare a lecture for our YouTube channel, Link for Skills.
All right. Okay. Take care.
Thank you. Take
Hope to
care,
see you
and
soon.
yeah, see you soon. Bye. Bye.
Bye-bye.